a lot of our technology affects animals in a negative way. We are completely dependent upon the natural world. Even if someone doesn't care much for nature and they care for money or investments, those investments are worth absolutely nothing if the life support system of this planet collapses.
What is something you learned from the octopus?
I've spent now the last 12 years or so diving every single day, more than 4,000 dives. In that time, I've met many incredible creatures. The octopus is just one of those. I've had incredible encounters with otters, with cuttlefish, seals, giant stingrays, huge sharks. They become these incredible teachers. What they've really taught me is that we are inseparable from the wild. There's a strange thing which I call nature's mirror, where what I'm feeling inside is mysteriously shown on the outside. If you go further back, of course, our ancestors are animals. If you go even further back, you realize that we are literally born from the dust of exploding stars. We started our creation 14 billion years ago. As you go deeper and deeper into understanding animals, into understanding human origins, there's a sense that it's all one. There's this giant unity, and the illusion is that you and I are sitting here as two separate beings, that we're actually one being talking to each other.
I think that helps so much to really see in animals, in plants, in like everything, the ocean. It's like, it's a person. It's just not in a human body, but still it's a personality.
We just eating up our planet. Shouldn't we be doing everything we can to look after the life support system that will radically affect the lives of our children?
Yeah, that's a good metaphor. Craig, I'm so excited and grateful to be with you today. And I had the pleasure yesterday to read through your book. And there was one passage that touched me. It was when you were talking about your grandmother. And you were saying about your grandmother that she was this wild woman, kind of, or a woman that was so connected to nature. And I loved it because what you wrote is that she always asked you when you were a little boy about your adventures, like what you experienced. And it touched me so much because I think this is ideally how every child should grow up, with a person who encourages them to go on adventures and to be wild and not to be like sit still. And so maybe we can start about talking about your grandmother and what she meant to you and what you learned from her and what made her this wild woman, kind of.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming. Lovely to be with you. So it was my grandmother and my great-grandmother were with me and my brother almost every day of our childhood. So they'd walk quite a far distance from their house, and then both my parents worked. So they'd spend time with us, and every day I'd be on the seashore in the intertidal, diving from a very young age. And I think the key thing was that I knew I could come back and tell them the stories. So there was this incredible circle, and then they were so attentive and so interested in what these small children were saying, which would probably be quite boring to most adults. They were so loving. The love was just extraordinary, unconditional love they had for us. That I think that fueled my fascination for nature a lot, because and for storytelling. My grandmother used to go on amazing adventures all over Africa and come back with these, for us at the time, were sort of hair-raising, terrifying stories of being chased by hippo and lions and rhino. I remember one story clearly of her having to climb a tree just before a black rhino got hold of her. So, and I think their boat was half turned over by a hippo, that kind of thing. So it was pretty incredible stories. And of course, then Africa was just teeming. So they were powerful stories that also, I guess, influenced my love for nature and for adventure.
What would you say was the greatest lesson you learned from your grannies?
By far the greatest lesson was the love that they gave us. And I've tried to give that to my son. It's the greatest gift that anybody can possibly give a human being.
That's beautiful. And when I read your book, it was so interesting because when you told me the title of the book, Amphibious Soul, in my brain, I was thinking that it will be mainly about also your experience here in the ocean with the octopus and what your movie is about, your documentary. That was, of course, like what I thought about. And then I started reading it and I realized, wow, this is also about us humans finding our amphibious soul. And maybe you can talk about this a little bit, like what is an amphibious soul to you? And how can we as humans reconnect to our amphibious soul?
Great, thank you. I think that, what I've spent now the last 12 years or so diving every single day. So it's more than 4,000 dives. And in that time, I've met many incredible creatures. The octopus is just one of those. I've had incredible encounters with otters, with cuttlefish, with seabirds, with seals, and just many giant stingrays, huge sharks, whales. And after a while, they become these incredible teachers. But ironically, they teach about humans. They teach about humanity. And what they've really taught me is that we are inseparable from the wild. We have this sense now, because of the strange lives we live, that there's sort of the wilderness and then there's humans. But actually, at all times, we're woven in. So this idea of the amphibious soul started to come to me. It's obviously, I've spent a fair part of my life like almost living underwater. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, but those hours are so intense, it sometimes feels like half of my life is underwater and half on land, but of course it's much less than that. So I'm fascinated by this amphibious nature that many, many humans have, this incredible pull to the water that I know you have. You've described it to me. And why is that the case? And why do we see, for instance, in the San rock art, incredible depictions of underwater scenes of half animal, half fish creatures? So this has been part of our collective psyche, I think, from deep, deep into our evolutionary past. But I think what it also says to me, this idea, if you put amphibious and soul together, it's about the tremendous joy that one feels when one's connected to nature. It doesn't happen all the time and every time, but often in these sort of special moments of grace, one just feels so free and so joyous. And I think it's partly because that's our design. We've had, as a hominid line, millions of years living wild, and in terms of Homo sapiens, our species, 300,000 years of living like that. It's only in the last evolutionary fraction of seconds that we've lived in houses, in air conditioning, in cars. So it's foreign to us. So when we go back and live in our design, there's this sense of belonging that's very powerful.
That's beautiful. And I could really, or it resonated very much with me when you described that you were like in the search of your own wilderness. And that like this feeling of that it's also kind of so difficult for us to reconnect because we are so disconnected from our soul. What helped, or would you say that you really reconnected with your own wilderness?
Well, I mean, it was, as you say, I found it at times, and I still do, sometimes find it very difficult to really connect with nature and feel like I belong. If I've spent too much time behind the computer or too many stressful calls or whatever it is, I can feel that disconnection, and it's very disturbing for me. But what I found is I found many ways of reconnecting in a very strong way. So I'm able to now use these tools, and I talk about that a lot in the book. All these ways of reconnecting to that wild person that's inside of all of us that wants to, come out and speak what I call the oldest language on earth. And for me, a big part of that oldest language is tracking. And I'm not just talking only about tracking spoor, animal prints in the sand. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of clues in nature that tell you about what's going on. And that's what I've been spending all these years doing, is learning this language directly from wild animals and also from indigenous master trackers. Back in the Kalahari, but also I have friends now, even in Cape Town, who are just, extraordinary in this art and just trying to get better and better.
What was the most surprising for you when you learned the art of tracking?
I guess the most surprising thing is that before you kind of would go out on just take a simple example, because I'm doing underwater tracking as well. But if I'm going a simple walk along a beach where there doesn't seem to be much going on, after years of doing this, you can go along that same beach and there are these incredible stories, quite obvious, in the sand, in little pieces of shell washed up, extraordinary stories that you can't, it's hard to believe that they're actually there, but the evidence is absolutely clear. So you can connect these dots in nature, and a simple walk along the beach becomes this fascinating look into a secret world.
So is it also about being more conscious in the present moment where you are and really take in your environment?
It's about being conscious, absolutely, but also observant. And then knowing what to look for from repetition. So we're just practicing again and again and again and again, writing notes, having a tracking journal, what you see in the book, thousands of notes, thousands of photographs, and just keep working on this, fascinating language that our early ancestors were, of course, fluent in. Every wild child before the advent of agriculture knew this language fluently. If you didn't know the language, you would die very quickly in the Stone Age. So it was part of survival, but what we can see from a lot of indigenous cultures is it also becomes a deep curiosity and a fascination, and they take it beyond the sense of survival.
How can we teach our children this, let's maybe a modern way of tracking in a way? Because, for example, if someone lives in the city but would like their child to be more observant and more aware, how could someone start to be like a modern tracker?
Yeah, great. I mean, that's a wonderful question. So sometimes in a city, it's all tarmac. There's no very obvious footprints. There are a lot of marks everywhere, so you can still do a lot of actual classic animal tracking. But a cool thing to do in a city with a child is to use olfactory tracking, so smell, because there are an incredible number of smells in a city. And this is a huge part of, tracking, is tapping into the other senses. So sound as well is very important sense for tracking. Early humans knew an intricate bird language that warned them about predators long before they saw them. So for many cultures, the ears were almost more dominant than sight, and in some places perhaps even the hearing. The hearing and the smell. So that's a wonderful way to introduce a child. And you could ask, well, what's that smell? And a child, of course, his senses often are much more attuned and acute than adults in some ways. So they can hear higher pitched sounds. Their smell might be actually better, although their way of translating it may not be. So it would be a fun thing to go around a city and say, well, what do you think that is? Before you actually see the source of the smell. And what does that mean? What does that tell us about what's going on in this environment? What does it tell us about the health or the non-health of the city? So it's endless.
It's beautiful. I never thought about it, but it makes so much sense also to really think about that. Yeah, thousands of years ago, it was every one of us did it. And I like that passage in your book where you talk about, it's in the beginning where you say that, like, before we never were inside. Like, there were no inside. Okay, maybe there were a cave, but we lived all the time outside, no matter the weather, no matter the conditions, and how much that must have changed as human beings, like becoming numb to what's going on the outside.
I also want to say, and I'm not trying to be against technology or against, many of the things in what I call the tame life are very fascinating, stimulating, and can teach one a lot. I use my camera a lot to understand animals. I use, other recording devices. So I'm not anti technology or this kind of thing, but the balance is so far off. That's, I think, the problem. It'd be so far imbalanced towards the tame world. And that's what I feel is dangerous in terms of future survival.
So you spend a lot of time with indigenous people, with tribes and communities. And I wonder, what is something that we can learn from indigenous people who I would say are like on the opposite scale, maybe, who are like not into technologies, but really living with nature? What can we maybe learn from them to move from our side a little bit more into the middle, where we combine both, like technologies and living in houses, but being more connected to nature?
The first thing that springs to mind is, the San Society and the Kalahari that I've spent a lot of time with. They are traditionally egalitarian. So men and women have equal status. That alone makes a huge difference. If we could bring that more into our society and give women far more decision making, I think we'd be far better off. Can
you tell us a little bit about what is different? Like, what is the difference then? How like in a daily life, how do you feel it's different when women and men are equal?
It feels that there's equality. It feels like that's how it should be, because that's how it has been. You must remember the San are the oldest living people on this planet. So from at least 120,000 years, you could make a case for there being an egalitarian society. So that's how we're supposed to operate. If the male dominates, you're going to get a lot of disturbance. You're going to get a lot of unrest. It's going to be if you go hard against the design, and it just makes common sense. You know, there's no sense in it not being like that. That makes all the sense. Another big factor is respect for animals. I mean, they have enormous respect for animals that they're tracking, even the animals that, of course, they're hunting. Immense respect. And we unwittingly have lost that respect. Some people still feel great empathy, but they don't know even what they're doing. We all are culprits in that way. You know, a lot of our technology affects animals in a negative way. But just to realize that the fundamental fact that a lot of indigenous people realize that we are completely dependent upon the natural world. Even if someone doesn't care much for nature and they care for money or investments or a building, we've forgotten that those investments are worth absolutely nothing if the life support system of this planet collapses. No money will be worth a cent or anything else for that matter. So we're utterly reliant on the natural world for everything we do, and we've forgotten that. So indigenous thinking can help us focus our attention on actually looking after the fundamental thing that keeps us all alive and breathing and eating and doing everything else. It's almost like we think we can live independent of nature, but that is like a scientifically absurd. Every single thing we do rests on her foundation. And if the biodiversity collapses, and in some places it has, we are going to be in enormous trouble, and all this wealth is going to be worth nothing.
What can we do?
So, I mean, I think what we can do is, what we're doing literally now is storytelling has been, since, beginning of time, literally shaped the way we interact with the world. The story we told and the story we believe is what we bring to the world. So if we actually have to fundamentally change the story of how we are living on this planet. That's the first thing we have to do. If we can change the story, then we can really change the way we are interacting with all the other wildkin, with the biodiversity, with the life support system of this planet.
And the core of that story is that nature and humanity is one, is intertwined, is connected, dependent on each other. Oh, well, the nature is not dependent on us, but we are on them, on it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the fundamental thing, and that we have to do everything in our power to support the biodiversity, which is the sheer number of animals, plants, minerals, bacteria that actually gave birth to us. You know, we literally made of it. That's our mother, far more so than our physical mothers. That's our mother. So we need to look after Big Mother.
Pachamama. Yeah, beautiful. That's beautiful. Since I'm born, I have this deep connection to animals. I don't know. I always liked, no offense, but I always liked animals more than humans, kind of. I just felt more comfortable with animals and a stronger connection, kind of. Or until today, it's easier for me to connect with animals than with humans sometimes. And I feel that for many people, it's the opposite. Like they are so, as you said, they don't respect animals. They don't respect the nature. They don't see the soul that every animal has, the character, and this is something I loved so much about my octopus teacher. And I really made it watch everyone I know because I felt like the story you tell with that documentary is that the octopus, which is such an incredible being, most people don't have any, I mean, people eat it, right?
Right.
And I, like, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story with the octopus, because maybe it helps people to understand better the soul of animals and the beauty and what we can learn from them and how important it is to honor them. And you just showed us before we started the interview, the movie, which are in your books, the little documentaries with the octopus that stole your camera and who filmed you, which I think was so amazing, where you said, right, that the octopus tries to show you her perspective of how she sees you and the world. Maybe we can do a deep dive into this world for a few minutes and take people into an octopus world and how she is and what you learn from being with an octopus.
Sure. So, I mean, I think there are some people like you who just, born and immediately have tremendous empathy for animals. But many others, like I wasn't immediately as a child so connected to animals. I loved the environment and I loved diving, but I didn't have that immediate connection to them. I needed to learn that. Mm. And I think that, so many people have such tough lives and difficult lives. They're just trying to survive. So it's very hard to then expect them to have great empathy for other creatures, even if they don't know them or they're not part of their culture. But it's just inside, it's just underneath the skin of every person, and especially people who are really poor, it's extra difficult for them. And they're just trying to survive, and to then start thinking about all these other things, very, very difficult. So what was amazing to me was that when I was privileged enough to have the time to spend every day observing, documenting, getting to know these secret lives of these animals, I suddenly realized that, they all have these extraordinary personalities. They all have, amazing things they do. The difficulty for many wild animals just to reach adulthood is an extreme journey. And that while there's a lot of predator-prey relationships, this entire ecological intelligence is supporting all these communities of animals. So when I go out now into the kelp forest, it's almost like going to meet family, kin. I know the fish, individual fish, and you fall in love with them. I know individual cephalopods. I know, I got to know this otter that died a while back, but you realize they're non-human persons. They are these extraordinary creatures who are incredibly intelligent and have managed to reach adulthood through, sometimes through enormous abilities and difficulties. And then this whole system is then supporting us humans. And we also a human animal. We actually are. So when you've had that time and connection, you naturally realize that this is the greatest treasure on this whole planet. this is the thing that's supporting all life. This is mother of mothers. So you naturally, it makes all the sense in the world to protect her. She is the basis. So, but I can also at the same time understand, most people haven't had the privilege I have to be so close to these animals. They're trying to survive, they're trying to make money, they're trying to feed their children. And it's easy to forget the origin of all of this. I myself, trying to do everything to support biodiversity, but I still struggle because our systems don't support that. Many of our, I can't go to a supermarket and buy things covered in plastic, and it's much more difficult to get everything. So this is where the story comes in, and the different story of how to interact with this world. But I certainly don't like to point fingers at other people, because it's easy for that finger to point back at myself.
A good friend of mine, Jay Shetty, he said that empathy, the book, The 5 Languages of Love?
I don't.
It's a beautiful book about a psychologist, and he says that we humans, we have different kind of how we communicate love. So it's either by physical touch, by words, by spending time together, acts of service, or words of affirmations. And that empathy is actually not communicating in your own love language, which might be words of affirmation, for example, but to understand your love language, which might be some physical touch or acts of service. And that I learn your language and talk to you in your language. And that is empathy. And I think this is so nice also to think about this with the animal kingdom. That
great idea, yeah.
Empathy is for us to learn their language and to understand them in their environment and what they are trying to tell us. And through empathy, connect and understand each other.
I love that idea, because most of these animals have their own, in inverted commas, language. And it's very empowering and fascinating to begin to understand that language, to understand just how, an octopus, just from what it's doing, what it's trying to say is really interesting. And you can, manage to achieve that to some degree, and to be able to understand what that animal is thinking.
Did you have the feeling in a certain moment of time that you were really like communicating with a certain, maybe the octopus or another animal in the ocean, where you really had this feeling like you're having a conversation without words?
So what I have had is when I'm tracking really well and reading all the signs everywhere, it feels like I'm having this amazing conversation with nature. And she's laid out all these incredible tracks and signs and marks, and I'm interpreting all that knowledge. And then somehow there's a strange thing which I call nature's mirror, where what I'm feeling inside is mysteriously shown on the outside. It's something that I can't even put into words, or easy, and it's not easy for me to explain, but I only know that it's happened again and again and again, too much to be attention bias or to be coincidence.
Do you have an example?
So, the classic example is when I, started trying to understand an animal called a tuberculate cuttlefish. It's a small cuttlefish that lives in the intertidal environment here. And it was very difficult to understand what that animal was eating, what it was predating. Some scientists might just take those animals and then, have a look and kill them and open them up and have a look inside what they're eating. I would never do that because I'm very close to that animal. But as soon as I started focusing on that and on many other animals, I got shown, I've been watching these animals, but without too much focus for years. And as soon as I started focusing on that, I actually started seeing them catching fish, catching invertebrates again and again and again. Like, I was doing exactly the same thing before, but without that focus. Why was I not seeing that before? And that's happened again and again to many animals. I think there's a story in the book where we were trying to figure out how these octopus were interacting with kelp limpets, the limpets that live up on the kelp. And sure, we found the shells in the dens, but it was very hard to actually ever see a predation. And then we went out specifically to try and find out more about this with that in mind, that focus. And it was a murky day, and I was holding onto the kelp, and then I felt an octopus arm on my hand, and I looked down, and there one was predating the limpet, but in a way that we could never have imagined or never worked out. It actually removed the shell. So many, many things like this, again and again and again happening, as if there's this strange relationship between the natural intelligence in nature and the human mind. And I can't, it's not easy to explain.
There is actually a physical term for it. In German, it's called, there has been a scientific experiment. In German, it's called das Doppelspalt-Experiment, which is like the double, I don't know how to say spalt in English. And so what they did, they shot like photons, like little atoms through on a wall. And then they put like a wall in between, and there were two like open things where they can move through. And so depending whether there was an observer of the photon or not, so whether there was a scientist watching the photon or not watching it, it either went through both or just one. So the conscious mind was making the photon move in a specific way. So it's incredible. And this is exactly what you just said, that human mind, kind of a consciousness, creates a certain outcome in the outside. Yeah, I will send you the link about it.
I have read of similar things in quantum science,
physics,
or quantum physics, where the human mind's affecting these particles. So I guess it's a good analogy too. But it feels vast and mysterious and very complex, beyond my capabilities to fully comprehend. But it feels fascinating. It feels incredible.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is incredible. I think we are not even close to understand how connected everything is, especially on a consciousness in general. It's just amazing when we think about it. So, when you were with the octopus and spending time with him or with her, what is something you learned from the octopus for your life?
So many things. Just trying to think of something that's worthwhile, like really good to talk about. I mean, a more obvious thing is the way that she cares for the young. You know, it's an extreme sacrifice when it comes to octopus, because they give their life for the young and they actually die. So if you think of in terms of we just eating up our planet and we making it almost a living hell for our children. they are actually sacrificing their bodies, their minds, their beings in order for their children to live. Shouldn't we be doing everything we can to look after the life support system that will radically affect the lives of our children?
Yeah, that's a good metaphor, or a good way what we can learn from them. Because I think maybe I would like to hear your thoughts on it, because I think the biggest trouble for humans is that we are so short-term thinking. Like, we are so addicted to short-term benefits. And we don't see, or we see the long-term effects, but we still behave like, but I want it now. What is something you maybe also learned from nature, or how we can change that within our human mind to not be so focused on what we can have now, but to really be aware of the consequences that the benefit maybe we get now will have like a huge negative impact on the long run.
So what springs to mind is the work with the cold water.
Mm-hmm.
So instinctively, I wanted to do all of this work without wearing a wetsuit. I'd grown up, as a child, and my parents, certainly in the early days, dived without wetsuits. So I knew you'd often felt very good when you didn't wear a wetsuit, but of course you'd get very cold. So you'd think naturally, are you going to be working a lot in the ocean? You would spend more time. It would be more beneficial. Just get a nice wetsuit and then you maybe do the work better. But instinctively, I felt that wasn't the case.
Mm.
And I think that's a good metaphor, because what happens is when you adapt your body to the cold in a slow way, it builds up your immune system tremendously. And it also I believe it changes your hormonal system, because in evolution, the human being is expecting to get cold often, and it's relying on that and waiting for those triggers. And it changes your brain chemistry quite very radically. So by not going for that immediate comfort and delaying gratification, you enhance your ability to be close to nature, because there's no barrier with the wetsuit. Your immune system improves, your cognition improves, your brain chemistry is elevated. Your whole life is actually changed just from that one decision. And I think that is a big factor in that. The problem is there's so many things in our society that are luring us very strongly into having that immediate gratification. And nature and our ancestry and where we've come from is teaching us that if we stay at least balanced and do a number of things wild, like wild people would, we are going to feel a whole lot better. Our mental health is going to be a whole lot better. Our physical body is going to be a whole lot better. And our cognition can be a lot better. So the cold in extremes can even sort of open up, the spiritual side. So it's got an enormous effect on the human being. And I think that's what nature can teach us, is that we are highly resilient. We are adapted for these things, and we don't need to, have these warm jackets and cowering inside and not let that wild person live a little bit.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think that's the best answer I ever got to that question. Thank you. It really helped me. What is your definition of spirituality?
Sure. How many hours have you got? It's a very, I don't have a sort of I guess, easily defined. I don't follow easily defined religion or anything like that. But I am fascinated I'm fascinated with shamanic cultures because I've had a lot of interaction with African cultures. I'm fascinated by our ancestors and all who've come before, because I sense that, this is actually an idea I got from amazing cosmologist Brian Swim, who's written this beautiful book, is that our minds are actually built from the minds of all of our ancestors. They're not our own. They're made up from our ancestors and all that, many of the ideas and everything. And one of my big passions is human origins, and I've been fortunate enough to work with incredible scientists who've studied our species, Homo sapiens, for their whole lives. And now I'm also very interested in hominids and our earlier ancestors like Homo erectus or Neanderthals. And I feel we are built from all of them. Now, how does that affect understanding of spirituality? If you go further back, of course, our ancestors are animals, and many of the traits we have today are from them. So if you go even further back, you realize that we are literally born from the dust of exploding stars. We started our creation 14 billion years ago when we had this giant event. So there's this tremendous, as you go deeper and deeper into understanding animals, into understanding human origins, there's a sense that it's all one. There's this giant unity. And the illusion is that you and I are sitting here as two separate beings, that we're actually one being talking to each other and everybody else here. And all the animals in the kelp forest just over there, same thing. Just consciousness flowing and finding its way in different personalities, different life forms, different veneers, like layers of paint on a surface of one giant creature.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I also really liked when you said before, like half an hour ago, that animals are just like no human person. Like that, I think that helps so much to really see in animals, in plants, in like everything, the ocean. It's like, it's a person. It's just not in a human body, but still it's a personality. And I think this is also good to build like stories about that we again see the person in everything.
Yeah, and even even the mollusks, you see that little limpet on a rock. It just looks actually like another rock. People would say, well, what are you talking about? But if you get down there and you watch these little creatures, they have also got personalities. They've got fascinating lives. You see if you wait at night, they come out, they do amazing things. They have gardens, they fertilize their gardens, they protect their gardens. They, have incredible communication systems. They survive massive storms. And suddenly, oh my God, this thing that just looks like an immobile rock has this.
It's a book in its own, kind of stories.
It's a library in its own.
Wow.
And 1 in 3 million survive to adulthood.
Wow.
It's that, and you realize this, that thing's precious.
It's beautiful. So I have one last question that I ask all of my guests. So imagine you live a very, very, very long life, and one day there will be the last day of your life. And how life is sometimes, I would be there and I would be like, Craig, we are both old. And I would tell you, your book got deleted, your documentaries are, nothing is there. Okay. Everything is deleted. And, I would give you a
That's a relief.
And, I would give you a white sheet of paper and a pen, and you could write down 3 things that you would like humanity to live by or to know. If this is all you could say and leave behind, what would you write down? Like 3 wisdoms or words or whatever feels right for you.
I mean, what immediately springs to mind is that I would say, look after Big Mother. Look after the mother of mothers, what we've spoken about. That is, to me, the fundamental, if we are to continue as a species, because the earth can take a lot of punishment and it will recover, but we are very, very fragile. So if we want to continue as a species, we need to really put enormous amount of attention onto our life support system, which is biodiversity. We need enormous number of different animals in the ocean and on land. Most of the animals and most of the biodiversity is actually in the ocean. So that's why my focus is on the ocean, and 70% of this planet is covered by ocean. And I think it's 90% or more of the habitat of animals is the ocean. So it's obviously the ocean is a huge part of our mother, and it regulates the climate, everything. So I would say, that would be the absolutely fundamental thing above everything else. I almost wouldn't have two other things because we get that right, then we can focus on all the other issues and, being egalitarian or, having more empathy for each other, trying to connect with our non-violent past. But that's the fundamental thing. And it's a hard thing. If someone says, I don't care about nature, but then, as we know, they care about their investment or their material wealth, but it's worth nothing without nature. It really isn't, and we've forgotten that.
Thank you. I just had that realization. Maybe you already had it, but it just came into my mind as we were talking about the inside equals the outside and the outside equals the inside. That if we look at the planet and it's like 70% water, I was just thinking it's so interesting because we are humans as well. That we are like the earth. Like we have our skin, which is like the land. And then we are 70% water, like the ocean. So we are like
amphibious souls.
Yeah. So, Craig, your beautiful, amazing book that I really can so wholeheartedly recommend to read because it really touched me. I told you before, like it really got inside of me, kind of. Like I really, also the beginning where you tell about like how you followed the crocodile and like going into her cave. And it was just so beautiful to read it. And it really resonated so much with me that I think the solution is to everything to reconnect to our wilderness and also to nature and to find the balance again. So thank you so much for writing it. And I know how difficult it is to write a book. So thank you for putting the work and the effort into it. And so it will be available soon, or maybe when the podcast is published. It is already published. And maybe you can tell a little bit about the QR codes that are inside.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, first, like to say, I agree with you. Writing a book is difficult. I find it's not as difficult as making a film. Mm-hmm. But I was fortunate in that I had an incredible group of people I was working with. Mm-hmm. So our Sea Change team, my wife Swati, just incredibly supportive. But I also had an incredible agent in Rachel Newman and our editor, Sarah Raynon. They are very experienced. It's my first book of this nature. I've done other books, coffee table books and so on, but have the support of these people. And amazing. Actually, I'm so fortunate to have a great publisher in Harper One. Also very supportive and understanding. So it feels like I'm just part of this process. But what was quite exciting for me was trying to think of, okay, how could one just give the reader a little bit more of an immersive experience, a bit of an insight of what it's like to be underwater tracking and so on. And I think the book shows that in quite a lot of detail. But what I've done is I've created a digital code in the book that the reader can then scan or just type in, and it takes them in quite an easy way, because I'm a non-techie kind of person, to our Sea Change website. And there's a 27-part short film series. So some of the highlights in each chapter you can immerse in these short films and really get to see exactly what that animal looked like, or meet these incredible indigenous teachers I had from 25 years ago in the Kalahari, who've now sadly passed. Or you can, learn how to track a big cat that's very difficult to track, or, learn about our human origins and learn about where you came from and when you first started to make symbols. And then, that was the big change of everything. So there are a lot of these details are in this short film series. But it's very much allied to the book. If you just watch those, you won't get a deeper sense of what's going on. But it's a very powerful addition to the experience.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for also, putting the work into doing the documentaries, because I saw 2 already and I really liked it. So, okay, your book will be out 23rd May 2024. Congratulations. And thank you so much for our conversation and for the really tremendous work you do. And maybe just, is there anything my community, the people listening to the podcast, can support your work or Sea Change? Is there anything?
I mean, that's very, very kind of you. The Sea Change Project is our NGO, that this amazing group of us, people, for the first 5 years, most of the people worked for free. They were just absolutely passionate about this. We've been going for, I think, 10 or 11 years now. And our whole focus is to try to bring attention to the great African sea forest and to the ocean and to a lot of the things we've spoken about today. Because we really think that the storytelling and getting this message out, and we also work with communities, with SAN groups, to just collaborate with them to try and get the message out, because they know so much. So we're doing on the ground work, we're doing work with species, we're studying 1001 species in the forest and bringing their stories out, and working with governments in South Africa and all over the world to bring protection to these species. Wow. So if people can support Sea Change in any way, by going to the website, donating, whatever they are able to do, that would be fabulous.
Amazing.
And we are absolutely committed. The team, every person in the team, I promise you, we don't have to motivate anybody. They are absolutely committed. You almost have to stop them from overworking and, work 7 days a week. So that would be fabulous if possible.
Of course, we will put the link in the show notes, and my communities, they love to support. So I'm sure that many people will find their way to your work. So thank you so much, Craig. I loved our conversation. Really, it was amazing. Thank you for everything you do. And
I was fascinated by your way of interviewing, where you don't have notes and it just flows. You sort of do it effortlessly. Fascinating.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming and all the effort, and for reading the book so quickly, or part of it.
Thank you.
Lovely meeting you and your wonderful team.
Thank you.